strong commitments to reduce carbon emissions and provide climate change education for all, prioritising both social justice and a just transition. We understand the context of this campaign. We are meeting in the time of COVID, a global health crisis the world's educators continue to meet head-on. We must have the same resolve with the existential crisis of climate change. In 2015, the world committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including inclusive, equitable, quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. Today, every goal is threatened. The head of the UN Environment Programme said recently, loss of biodiversity and ecosystem integrity, together with climate change and pollution, will undermine our efforts on 80% of assessed SDG targets. There is no region of the world spared from climate issues, but I'm speaking to you tonight from the Asia-Pacific region. And in a sense, I am speaking to you from the future. It is difficult to be optimistic. It's early autumn or fall here, too early for storm season. And yet cyclones killed hundreds in Indonesia last week before slamming into the west coast of Australia. It follows a year of massive storms with rain measured at nearly a metre in just a matter of days, forcing some 20,000 people to evacuate and more than 150 schools to close. Only a year ago, it was the worst wildfires in recorded history. And 5 of the 10 most endangered nations due to climate change are in our region: Japan, Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, and Fiji. It's one reason why the meeting just weeks ago of the Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum was the 7th annual convening. Among the findings, environmental changes are undermining hard-won development gains by using economic costs and millions of premature deaths annually. They are impeding progress towards ending poverty and hunger, reducing inequalities, and promoting sustainable economic growth. We are going to have a lot of discussion today about the intersection of climate education and broader civics and democracy education. We have a moment in history that we must seize upon. That is a broad understanding of the importance of science and fact and the cost to us all from the lies and hypocrisy of demagogues. As educators, it's a moment we have worked to create, to be prepared to lead and learn from each other, to give our students the tools of lifelong learning, the experience to understand, collaborate, and act on complex issues as active and inclusive citizens. There isn't a moment to lose. So, colleagues, let us begin our program on this note of empowerment. We must always be realistic, but our profession is focused on the future. We can never fail to be hopeful and even optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for that wonderful message. Of course, following up on Susan's message, we are now joined by other members of our panel. Of course, this includes Haldus Holt, who is the Deputy General Secretary for Education International. We also have Spiso Ndlovu, who is the CEO of Zimbabwe Teachers Association. But first, I'm going to begin with you, Spiso. You have already shared this wonderful presentation with Education International. Of course, this will be made online for those who would like to read through this presentation. But Spiso, our time is limited, so I really need to warn you there. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to climate change, how does this impact your country in which you come from, which is Zimbabwe? And what is the role education unions is in your country? What is the role that they are promoting when it comes to climate change education?
Thank you very much, Mbali. I would like to demonstrate the agency of climate change education in Zimbabwe and emphasize that it comes through the eyes and experiences of Cyclone Idai, which hit the Zimbabwean eastern border, in particular our Manicaland province on the 15th of March 2019. where we experienced a loss of life, and many of our learners paid the supreme price of poorly managed climate in this global, in the earth, this earth of ours, where we had 120 learners who passed on, who were in the grades ECD up to advanced level, and 6 educators, including their spouses, 2 spouses perished in that dilemma. We saw also the destruction of schools' infrastructure when we lost learning and teaching materials, including school time. And we also had a destruction of the health services facilities. And this led to vector-borne diseases that were coming through. And we saw the rise of cholera and malaria and also typhoid. These were some of the experiences which were nasty as a result of this bad management of the climate that were brought to ourselves. Finally, we saw the loss of income with a number of parents and learners, teachers losing income, which was supposed to take their livelihoods forward and their standards of living. This indicates the urgency that we must involve ourselves as unions in trying to arrest the issue of degradation of our environment. And what role do the unions have to play? Obviously, the most natural role that we have to do is the issue of knowledge broking. We are the knowledge brokers, and we need to do the research. We also need to provide the leadership wherever we are in society, which can influence the thinking of our society towards a better managed climate. And using climate change education, we can use it as a very important utility tool. We can see that it is embraced in our target 4.7 of the SDG 4. So using that, we can see ourselves therefore interfacing with many organizations and departments and also many other activists who are interested in achieving the SDG 13 and 16. As a diagnostic tool, quality climate education will help us show the world that the bad climate that we have is affecting disproportionately the vulnerable members of our society. For example, in our case in Zimbabwe, we saw that the urban schools were differently affected, unlike the rural schools which were in Manicaland, which were devastatingly affected. So there is therefore that impact which is disproportionate to the vulnerability of any member of society or group. And as a responsive tool, we are going to be using this climate change education to try and recreate our institutions such that they are safe institutions for our learners, they are safe institutions for our teachers, they are safe institutions for our community, and they can be resilient to any forms of change in climate. So that is very important in terms of influencing our direction towards quality climate change education. And lastly, as an adaptive tool, we'll see it as a tool that will help us restructure our curriculum, particularly the issue of mainstreaming the content of climate education into all learning areas around us beyond the STEM disciplines. Previously, we've been emphasizing through the STEM disciplines the issues around climate change, but now we must broaden that and include almost every area. And lastly, I would like to say the movement forward in Zimbabwe, for example, has seen us focusing on the pedagogy, the aspects on which we can influence our teaching, where we are talking about teacher capacity building in terms of disaster risk management. We also do the issue of teacher capacity building in terms of understanding climate education. This is a way where we have influenced even the education sector in our country in its education strategic plan to bring this as part of the focal point, which will be pursued in the strategic plan 2021-2025 of our education. Interestingly, we have also been working with the Ministry of Environment, Climate, Tourism and Hospitality Industry, which has come up with a very grand strategy of the National Climate Change Learning Strategy. So interfacing with these groups in government and other civic organizations, there has been a good influence. And I think this way we can, as teachers, have an impact. And we have been doing it in a small way from our own side as Zimbabwe Teachers Association. And lastly, of course, the development of teaching material is of paramount importance. And that must be anchored by wide support, where we can bring about literature that can support our learners and teachers in how to teach. I must thank you, Mbali. This, in the shortest space of time, is what I can say about the agency of quality climate education in this world.
Thank you so much, Sviso, for that insight. Of course, now we will be bringing Susan back. And Susan, my question to you is, as Education International, it does view climate change education as a key component of quality education, and most importantly, a right for all students. Can you elaborate on why this is so?
Well, Mbali, look, the climate crisis is as existential for educators, our students, our communities, the entire planet. And we know that we're in an emergency, and so we've got to use every tool that we can to meet that crisis: mitigation, adaptation, persuasion, prevention, just to name a few. And it's the core, it's the essence of our role as educators, to give our students the tools to be active citizens, to understand the world they live in, to see a future they can own, to work and act in collaboration with others on complex issues like sustainability. But for me, one of the critical things is that the future belongs to our students. It is their future. And they have the right to have the knowledge and the skills, the literacy, to be able to stand up and argue and create a world that they want to live in, a safe world, one where we are actually addressing the issues of climate change, a world that will exist for many generations to come. And in the end, I think that's the reason why we've got to ensure that all of our students can receive climate education.
Thank you, Susan. And now to bring in our other panelist, of course, we will be now speaking to Haldus. And Haldus, you know, at a time like this, we are in a pandemic. The world is facing the pandemic of the coronavirus, and Education International is, of course, having this a global education summit at a very crucial time. If you can just tell us why action for climate change education is necessary even more now, and it simply just cannot wait.
You're right, Mbali, and I think you just said it, that we simply cannot wait. And I think our president, Susan, also said that very clearly in her opening remarks, that this is not a moment to lose. And I think we've seen all through this pandemic that teachers and other educators have kept on working. And they've been acknowledged for that. They've been out there for their students, whether it's been online, whether it's been on radio, whether it's been driving around, trying to deliver an education that is relevant for them here and now and for the future. And even though we are in a pandemic, the challenges for the future haven't disappeared. So we need them to be part of the education we deliver today and tomorrow. And climate change is one of them. It's not just about learning to read and write. That's important because they are important tools to be able to acquire knowledge, to utilize knowledge, and to reflect on how you can make a difference. Teachers and education, like Susan said, is about the future. And what our students are concerned with, and also sometimes expects fear for, is a future that is impacted by climate change. And I think that's why educators are so concerned of having a content and an education that addresses this so that it's relevant for our students. Some already have that curriculum. Some are already dealing with this on a daily basis, but others need that framework to be able to use the time and space to be relevant for their students, and also to give them the educational space that also is safe to reflect on the knowledge that is out there, to reflect on how this impacts on their daily life. Like Sifuso had the example from Zimbabwe, and Susan also from the Asia Pacific. Our students live the consequences of climate change every day. And they need to be able, as I said, to reflect and acquire knowledge so that they can develop how they can make a change for the future. Because they can. Because we need to instill that hope that Susan reflected to, that they feel, yes, I can make a change as an activist, as a citizen, when acquiring your skills for the job and the career you want to do, that you see that, yes, I can do that in a better future within a green economy. And that's the purpose that teachers want to be there for their students, including other educators, to everyone who interacts with young people. You want to be able to be relevant for them today, and young people are asking for this. In a way, we could even say that we have a lot to learn from young people, because they can teach those of us that have been around a long time and have difficulties in changing our habits that, yes, it's possible to act in a different way. Yes, it's possible to think in a different way. Yes, it's possible to implement other solutions. And our students are the future. They are going to give us those solutions, and we need an education to deliver that. Teachers today, educators today are ready to do that. Even though we are in a pandemic, they're not teaching about the pandemic every day. They're trying to teach the full breadth of the curriculum, and they're preparing for the day that the pandemic is over. We have to prepare for recovery too. And teaching about climate change education is part of the recovery, because that is also interconnected with all the other challenges we have, also when it comes to inequalities around the world. And we need to see how they interact and how we can create a better future that is more just for all our students, our Indigenous students, for girls, for people with disabilities, all the people that now we see are more affected by the pandemic are more or less the same people that will be more affected by climate change. And we need to step up and equip our students so they can make a change. So yes, it's important, and teachers want to do it now.
Thank you, the Halders, and thank you to all our leaders for outlining the significance of this campaign, and of course, why it is so urgent. Now, students have the right to quality education, which must prepare them to build a sustainable future. Teachers also have a responsibility to act in their classrooms as well as in their communities, and also call on governments to ensure that this right is fulfilled. Before we go to our next panel, and when we look at how our members are leading on climate change education, we have a video. This video comes from our colleagues in Mexico, and this union is called the National Union of Education Workers, or rather, some people may call it as SNTE. They have been working on these issues for many decades. We also want to thank our interpreters in advance, because translating a live video is not easy.
More than 900 kilometers away from where this sound was produced by a humpback whale, we have the closest coastal city, which is Revillagigedo. Because it is very, very far away, it is very probable that the only way in which we will actually hear this whale will be through this recording and never on site. We're really far away from our seas, living our own lives without even knowing what's happening in them on a daily basis. We are the species which has mostly evolved from the seas, but we also have a very big impact on the quality of the lives of all the living species there. We have fauna, the flora, the microscopic and macroscopic livings, vertebrates, invertebrates, oviparous, viviparous, and many different living things which are living within the seas we have with different microclimates all throughout the earth. The Earth's oceans account for 70% of the Earth's surface, and a lot of what happens in the Earth depends on them. For many centuries, the human, uh, we have used and abused our marine ecosystems uh, and the damage we have caused is almost irreversible. Litter, plastics, contaminants have been contaminating the seas and harmed and killed many of the living things we had in them. We have lost many species to what we've been doing, and we have had caused a great damage to the ecosystems. Our book, which is called Our Seas, basically explains how the seas in the world work. It explains how this very interesting world behaves and what all the different interactions from the different actors are. It has been published by our trade union and it concentrates on the different changes that our society has to introduce all throughout the world in order to protect our seas. We want to be socially responsible, and as a result of this aim, in very recently we have launched a national program in order to educate on responsible development. We want to be innovative, enthusiastic, and we want everybody to be on board. It is up to us and up to the next generations to change the way we live so as to protect whatever is left of our seas and oceans. We all have to be responsible for what happens to our seas.
Certainly a grim picture of what the country may look like if teachers don't take a stand or the world takes a stand against, of course, climate change. But now bringing us to the second part of our uh, uh, segment here, we are joined now from Mexico by Yolanda Martinez Mendoza. Of course, she is from SNTE, and we spoke to her a bit earlier on. And of course, we asked her some questions on how they made climate change education essential to their union work. Let's take a listen.
So you have been one of the leaders when it comes to education and climate change. Where does it come from? How did you get this idea? Well, thank you very much. And first of all, on behalf of my trade union and my general secretary, I would like to say good hello to all of you. As regards the question, this decision came directly from our trade union. We thought that it was convenient and very important for us to collaborate in all the different actions which were taking place throughout the world in order to protect biodiversity and the natural resources we have. We want to make sure that we contribute to a sustainable development. So, in virtue of our statutory framework, we decided to create a national program which was launched as part of a project of our trade union SNTE, sorry. Co-responsibility is something which is crucial for us. So our main objective was to promote and to strengthen the commitment which had already been acquired but by all the different workers and educators towards climate change. We concentrated on sustainable development on the one hand, environmental care and awareness, and sustainable buildings. We realized that we had many challenges ahead of us, but they could also be transformed into opportunities. So we tried to reach out to parents, young people, and introduced many different programs. And we also started working together with very big organizations, for example, with the Secretary for National Defense and the Secretary of the Navy, but also with educational institutions throughout the world, such as Education International, the UNESCO, and many other non-governmental organizations. This has been a national program, therefore, with which we want to be able to implement the best practices we have identified in the world when it comes to climate change and sustainable development. And we try to introduce that through modern projects which are based on a constant monitoring and evaluation system. In order to do that, we created a national committee, but we also have set up several subcommittees throughout the country. And this is how we started with this task that we are sharing with you today. It's been the result of very hard work on a daily basis. We've been working out with teachers, working with students, and with the entire community. Can you share some examples of the activities that you are implementing? Yes. So as I said before, we are implementing different campaigns. Some of them are in the long term and some of them are short-term campaigns. The most permanent one is called Small Acts but Very Big Impacts. And as a part of this campaign, we have published notebooks for children so they can learn about ecology. So children are given notebooks including information and pictures and drawings so that they can also interact with them. And on top of that, we give them tips and explanations as to how we can better preserve our environment. These campaigns have also included other actions. For example, we have concentrated on recycling and we have done a national contest on recycling. We have tried to explain to our children how they can actually reuse many of the things they have at home so that they do not have to throw them away and constitute a harm to our nature and ecosystems. We have also launched different awareness raising campaigns using the media and the press, working together with educational institutions and schools. We have given the word to students so that they could actually explain how they contribute to preserving nature. And we have also launched a call so as to preserve and take care of the vaquita calf. It is a mammal which lives in the seas. It's endemic from our country and it is almost it is almost extinct, so there's not so many of them at the moment, and we want to make sure that we preserve this vaquita. We have also launched several contests with schools and teachers, and the jury has said that it was actually very, very difficult for them to choose a winner. It was very difficult because very often we had so many good participants that it was a tie in the end. We just could not choose one single person as the winner of the contest. So that's something that we have also done. That's another example of the campaigns we have launched. Some of them are long-term campaigns, as I said, and some of them are in the short term. What we try to do, anyways, is to always work together with young people. Unfortunately, as a result of the current pandemic, we are no longer able to continue with the campaigns that we had foreseen for 2021. However, we are ready. So as soon as the pandemic is over, we will resume work.
Thank you, Yolanda, for sharing with us. Of course, your work remains an inspiration and a model to follow. We'll now bring in our next panel and who will be sharing with us how education unions are taking the lead and how they have been leading for decades on this issue of climate change, of course. So we will now be speaking to Liam Rutherford. He is the president of the New Zealand Educational Institute in I will also be speaking to Rosilla Benedetti from International, or rather UIL Scola in Italy. Of course, she is the International Secretary. And lastly, we'll also be joined by Gifty Eppenville. He is the Deputy General Secretary of the Ghana National Association of Teachers. Now, I'm just going to begin with Rosilla. Rosilla, when you look at climate change, you would know that Italy is understood to be the first country to introduce a mandatory course on climate change and, of course, sustainable development for all of its students at all public schools. Tell us about the experience from a union perspective.
Merci. Bonjour à tout le monde. Merci pour l'invitation.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Education to environment has been a compulsory subject matter in Italian schools, but already started working on this in the 90s. So we have had a lot of experience. So before it was not compulsory, but now it is. And primary schools, secondary schools have worked a lot on education to environment. So it is something very important because we are a lay union, a non-religious union that believes that the mission of schools is to train citizens, not to have students becoming the robots on the labor market. So we think that education to citizenship is key, and the climate change is part of that. But unfortunately, everything has been delegated to the teachers. Teachers have to be trained on these different issues to better teach education to environment, but it's a very quick training course, a very short time training course. They have to pay for that. At the same time, they give classes or they have to undergo these training courses during their free time. So if we want to guarantee quality education, it is important to set aside time for teachers, to give them the time to be trained on that. It's also important to give them training opportunities that are free of charge. So they shouldn't pay from their pockets. And because we are, of course, aiming at an education of quality. And the students have to understand the world in which they will live and work. So they have to learn how to respect the environment.
To our next panelist, of course, Liam. Liam, in New Zealand has committed to teaching students about the climate crisis. What is your union's approach in making this happen?
Kia ora koutou, ko Liam Rutherford Takawingawa, ko Aotearoa or NZI Te Reroa. It's great to be here with you today, and I just want to acknowledge Education International for bringing this global conversation together, because it's certainly what we are going to need if we're going to aspire to the change that we need for the climate movement. Here in New Zealand, we talk a lot about the entitlement that students have to not just knowing about climate change, but also having the courage and confidence to be a part of the solution. And this is where we are really excited, because teachers call out for these authentic learning experience to work alongside students with. And in climate change, we do have that option to really take what we want to do in the classroom out into the real world. And so we're really delighted with some of the examples that we've got happening of young people taking local action, making a difference within their communities. From NZI Te Reroa's perspective, though, the teaching and learning, the curriculum aspect of climate change is really one small part of the role of unions. Our work looks to cover 4 strategic areas. We think that the first one is that as a union, we actually need to get our own house in order. And so we are working towards ourselves becoming carbon neutral. We think that's really important, that if we're going to talk the talk, that we have to be able to walk the walk. The second strategic area for us that is really important is that focus on developing member leaders to be able to take action within their own work sites, within their own schools and centres around their transition to becoming carbon neutral themselves. That is around schools themselves becoming sustainable in the energy sources that they use, as well as minimising waste. And the extension of that is actually schools seeing themselves as role models within their communities. We know here in New Zealand and around the world that actually educators are highly trusted within their communities, and we see schools and early childhood centres as having a change agent responsibility as a country, within the country, as we look to moving towards a lower emission economy. Our third area is around the support that we have for the wider union movement to bring about a just transition. We've got parts of New Zealand where we've got regional economies that have been heavily reliant on oil and gas, being told that by 2050 you have to have stopped. And what our members are really aware of is that because employment within their part of the country relies heavily on oil and gas, if we don't ensure that there's a just transition, then we're going to be facing school and early childhood centre closures. And so educators do see a really core role for them in being a part of that transition. And the final area is the one that I probably should have started with, and that is around our approach being one where we are wanting to approach it with a Māori worldview, to really recognise that Indigenous voices and approaches need to be at the table. It's widely understood that, by and large, Indigenous communities tend to bear the brunt of climate change, despite contributing very little to it themselves. And we know that here in New Zealand, Māori have such a connected relationship between people and land, that means actually they're well placed with a lot of their traditional knowledge to be setting the scene for what solutions need to look like.
Thank you very much Liam. I think that we have our other panelist back on the line. Thank you so much, Gifty, for joining us. My next question is to you. Climate change is, of course, an emerging area of focus for your union. And of course, looking at this, why do you think that education unions should start working on this issue?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you very much for EI engaging in this particular conversation. Climate change is a real situation affecting the whole world. in our part of the country, we have seen the effects of climatic change. We have seen a lot of destruction in terms of tidal waves that has eroded the whole community, displacing them, floods displacing whole communities, temperatures creating diseases and all kinds of things that are real. And we think that is a conversation that all well-meaning citizens should be involved. Teachers are supposed to educate for change, for development. And so therefore we see ourselves as a teacher union well positioned to engage in this part of this kind of conversation. We as a union know that when there are floods, school children are displaced, our classes are disrupted, and therefore we need to engage whole communities and the citizens to sensitize them to know the effects of climate change. As a union, we have engaged with the ministry to ensure that the new curriculum that they are developing, they have inculcated or included in it issues about climatic change, and they have included issues that will educate the children on the need to be environmental friendly. We are going to lobby with the government as they attract investors into our country, the kind of things that agreement that we should all enter into, so that whatever activities that they are going to do will not affect the environment adversely. Africa as a continent depends so much on the environment for our survival. Our Greek systems are linked to climate and the weather. And so we have seen a lot of changes occurring now, and therefore it will be very easy as teachers to influence society to have a positive change towards the way we handle our environment. Crops are failing, drought is approaching, and animals are dying. It is quite evident that when teachers who are trusted by society take the lead in this advocacy, they will listen to us. We have embarked on green schooling, educating the children as to how they should plant trees in their schools to make sure that the climate there is very conducive. And so we are lobbying the government to ensure that when they are writing textbooks for the schools, they will make these textbooks very climatic sensitive. We will sensitize our teachers to make sure that they understand the issues at stake, so that they themselves, when they are well informed and they are in the classroom, they will be able to teach the children so that they will know that the future is theirs. Whatever climatic changes that are taking place now will definitely affect them in the future. And so the children themselves should understand the issues very young, so that whatever activities we are doing, they will be mindful and alert all the elderly ones when they are trying to do things that will affect the environment. We will join hands with other unions, especially those who are into production, to make sure that we all understand the issues and advocate, and make sure that all of us live our lives in a way that will not negatively affect the environment. We depend on the trees and other things for fuel wood. We have to look at ways of making sure that we use renewable fuel for our domestic consumption, so that we do not destroy the vegetation and affect climate as it has already happened. We are very glad that we will be part of this, and that we are also happy that it will go a long way to increase productivity in our country, because our whole production sector is linked to climate. And therefore, it is very, very crucial for all of us to engage our children who are very young. They have an influence. As teachers, we have influence in the society, and we can easily lobby the government to listen to us and mount pressure on those investors who are coming in to make sure that their activities are environmental friendly. We will join hands with the whole world, the teacher fraternity, to make sure that our voices are heard all over. And in Ghana, we will also copy from others best practices and make sure that our young children are well educated on the need to make sure that we protect the environment and ensure that the drastic climatic change that we are experiencing will be reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gifty. There, just talking about how crucial it is to protect the environment and to save it for future generations to come. I'm going to bring in Rosilla once more. Rosilla, my next question is once more to you. Can you just tell us about your union's experience of working across sectors in the union movement on climate action?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Very much for this question. We part of a huge Italian union federation, so it's very easy for us to work with other sectors. And my Labour Italian Federation is very active in the field of environment. We very much involved in various activities with them in terms of labour opportunities, labour challenges. So we share a lot about all these issues and we help one another. We work in the field of adult training of students, pupils, so we have this expertise and so we can work jointly with various ministries, Ministry for the Environment, and contact with other federations and international organizations. So we organize joint activities. One activity that was held 10 years ago was a very interesting project and alternative energy sources. That was a training for teachers and for students, and this was organized thanks to a collaboration between my education union and my union federation. So collaboration is very important. Why that? Because then you can better understand the economy mechanisms so that you can better understand the situation, and we can then better teach our students how to reduce industry impact on the environment. We can then transfer our values over to other sectors. It has to do with the social sphere, family sphere, but work environment. You have to train workers. Very often when you leave school, you tend to forget values. You tend to forget that you are part of a global environment, and if you're a worker, you shouldn't work the fact that you're part of a whole environment.
Liam, what do you consider the most effective strategies for education union advocacy on the issue of climate change education?
So for us, I think it is about having to walk the walk in the way that you take this seriously. And so our journey has been over the last 5 years, and year on year, what we're doing is a better job of normalising this across what it means to be a part of NZI Te Reo. And it started right at the top. It was our national executive setting up a specific work group to really drive the types of behaviours that we wanted through the union. Over time, we have then had to commit staffing to that. And I think that's a really important point, is that we're actually not going to make the traction that we need to by just picking up on conversations. It's actually putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that we're employing people to do the work on the ground. And that's where we've been really fortunate with Connor Twyford, who is the person that we have employed to really take this forward. She's got real strengths in working locally with members on the ground. And actually, that's where we're seeing the most amount of value in our work, is not necessarily around those high-level messages, but actually doing the coalition building on the ground. We know that unions do a really good job of mobilising people around social issues, and climate change is just another one of those examples. One really quick example is the work that we are doing around working with government to commit to phasing out all coal boilers as a heat source for schools. Up until recently, the government has just kind of wiped their hands of the issue and said, actually, that's for schools to fund. But realistically, we're setting schools up to fail because they're never going to be able to have the capital needed to be able to transition to low economy, to low emissions energy. And so that is where that on-the-ground coalition building, the work that Connor's been doing with working with members to be able to go and lobby government has been really important.
Thank you very much there, Liam. And my last question now goes to you, Gifty. If you can just tell us, what role can unions play to ensure that girls enjoy their right to quality climate change education?
Thank you very much. Every child has a right to quality education, including quality climate education. And so, therefore, unions must advocate and ensure that both girls and boys have quality education on the climate. The causes, effects, and remedy for climate change, to me, is a gender issue. And if it is a gender issue, girls must be well educated, because they are the ones who fetch firewood, they burn charcoal, they travel far distances to fetch water when there is drought. And because of all these things affecting them, when there is somebody who is sick in the house because of outbreak of any disease because of climate change, it is girls and women who take care of the sick in the house. So women and children, child, are the people who are bearing the brunt of climate change. And so therefore they deserve to be given quality education in climate change, so that they can be part of the remedy for the solution for climate change. Books that are going to be written, materials that are going to be used for education should all have gender sensitive materials, gender equality materials, and be sure that they are addressing the issues that are affecting both girls and boys when there is climate change. It is important that women are the first to educate children in the house. So educating the girl child on climate change, we will ensure that every household is going to be given that adequate education, even at the beginning, before the children even come to school. So it is important that unions advocate that girls should be given quality climate change education, because they will give a whole generation that kind of education. If they become mothers, they are able to influence, because they are the people who are the homemakers. And majority of the issues that are affecting our climate come from the way we handle our environment. So far as our home is concerned, livelihoods are concerned, and it is affecting women now, because most women are engaged in peasant farming. And these days, they are not getting good crops and other things. So I think that as unions, we must advocate that every child deserves quality education, including climate change education. And materials that are going to be used for this purpose must be designed in such a way that they are acceptable to both boys and girls. And that if everybody is given equal opportunity to be educated on the subject matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gifty, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing your experiences and, of course, your views on advocating for climate change education. You have shown that education unions are taking the lead in diverse ways, and, of course, your stories have both been informative and inspiring for the education union movement. Now, moving on, the American Federation of Teachers in the United States has been creating and sharing lesson plans and member-generated ideas around climate change on their Share My Lesson platform. Now, of course, this platform is open to all educators who want to join and of course, look at this amazing resource. Now, let's take a look at this special insert. Of course, that is a platform that many educators can make use of. And now joining us now is, of course, another one of our moderators, and her name is Patricia Guadalupe. She is from NBC Latino, and she is an associate professor at American University and a union member. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us. That's it from me, from my side. It's now over to you.
Thank you so much, Mbali. I'm really happy to be joining this program and we have so much more coming up. So let me go ahead and start introducing our next topic. Denial of human-induced climate change is alive and kicking in diverse contexts across the world. Climate change deniers ignore scientific consensus and refuse to work towards the solutions we urgently need. Quality education plays a key role in making sure our students are informed and can think critically about the information that surrounds them. And so now we're joined by Michelle Codrington-Rogers, citizenship teacher and ex-president of the Teachers Union, NASUWT, who was with us from her school in Oxford. We also welcome Kathy Dorman, a science teacher from the American Federation of Teachers who is in Colorado, and Fatima Cliede from CNTE, who is in Brazil and will be speaking to us in Portuguese. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to start first with Kathy, who joins us. I don't even think that the sun is up where you are, so thank you so much for getting up so early. As a science teacher, how do you address the issue of fake news, for instance, of climate change denialism with your students?
Well, thank you for having me here. And yeah, it is 6 o'clock in the morning, so the sun is not up in Colorado. This is an interesting topic. There really is a scope and a sequence that teachers need to implement to engage their students in this conversation. And so the very first thing that I do early in a school year is talk about the nature of science with students. And I hope that they gain an understanding of where science falls in the realm of information. And so we talk about how it's consistent. You look at observable phenomena. It's in the natural world. It is predictable. It's testable. And it's tentative. And that idea of being tentative, that things change when we get new information. So if you lay the background, then you get into the discussion of this idea of fake news and misinformation. And we're seeing more and more of this. I've been an educator for 37 years. And so with the onset of all the social media access that kids have, what we're seeing is more and more misinformation and fake news be sent out there on the air, and kids are getting a lot of that. So after they understand the nature of science, then we can start asking, okay, let's take a look at this report or whatever it is, a statement that someone makes, and let's analyze it. So you get kids to use their critical thinking skills. And really what that involves is we want to look at what we call a claim. What is this piece of information claiming? And then look for the evidence that supports that claim, and then use critical thinking skills to reason through it and see if there really is evidence in existence that allows us to believe this thing to be true. So I'm not going to stand in front of my classroom and say, well, no, that's just fake news. I want them to draw that conclusion themselves.
Interesting.
So, I was just going to add one more thing, and that is, and we can talk more about this later, but one thing that teachers need are reliable resources to help them create these lessons. And that is a problem. Not every science teacher necessarily has access to reliable information that they can use.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and we can certainly go back to that. I wanted to turn to Michelle now, and educating about the climate crisis can be viewed as political and therefore controversial, especially when it explores the intersections of climate change and social justice, and where it includes discussion of global power imbalances or promotes civic action. Now, what can teachers do to navigate this?
Thank you, Patricia, and I apologize for my office being so messy. And if any students pop their heads up behind me, again, I do apologize.
I think fine.
It's absolutely crucial that we understand that everything is political, and education is no different. I teach citizenship, and I'm proud to teach citizenship. And I say to my students at the beginning of every year, my job is to create professional troublemakers, because education is always about preparing the next generation for the world as it should be, not just as it is. And so we need to, as teachers, recognize that we are activists, whether we teach maths, whether we teach science, whether we teach geography, whether we teach citizenship, whether we teach personal social health education. What we're trying to do is to create the next citizens for this world. And so teachers have to recognize that we do have a place as activists, and it's not something we should be scared of, because what we're trying to do is to not just impart information, but also, I would hope, we want to create people who want to make the world better. And so it's really important that as teachers and as educators, we understand that we are grounded in our communities. So whether it's local, whether it's national or global, which is why summits like today is phenomenal, that actually we recognize that we are part of a system, which means that we're trying to prepare the world for as it needs to be after we leave the classroom. But it's also about us making sure that we work not just with each other, but that actually we work and we connect with civil society, and we connect with organizations that are already doing this work, so that when our students are hearing this information, they're not just hearing it from us, they can see that it's part of something bigger. And that's where that intersectional approach to social justice has to be embraced, because for all of our students, they are sitting in front of us with lots of different hats and identities. We have to make the world relevant to them. And by engaging with organization and campaign groups that are already doing the work, that's where we are able, not just as trade unions, but also as teachers, to amplify their voices rather than take over their campaigns. So it's phenomenal hearing about what's happening in other countries around the world, because what we do here impacts on each other. And so that's where, as teachers, we have got that ability to create those links.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for those comments. Le quería preguntar a usted, Fátima, en Brasil.
I'd like to ask you, Fatima, about Brazil, especially right now with the government of Bolsonaro.
Existe uma grande
There is a
tendência
very big
negacionista.
trend
Como é que
towards the
tal tem
denial of climate change.
efetuado, como
Can
é que
you
tem
please
afetado o seu
explain to
trabalho e
me
a sua
how
luta?
this is affecting your work and the fight
Hello,
that you are
I'm delighted
undertaking?
to be here with you all, sharing with you all, Patricia, at this table on behalf of CNTA Brazil. I speak from the Amazonia. I'm in Porto Velho, Rondônia, in the north of Brazil. I'm a worker and the public servants. I was a member of parliament of the Republic, and now I work at
Et
a school in the suburbs of the city. And at this moment here in Brazil,
au
we are facing a
Brésil, nous sommes
huge difficulty.
très impactés par
We deal with current fascism from Bolsonaro government. It's an extremely violent government, violent with the environment, violent with the human rights, and above all, with the poorest people, with the most vulnerable ones. They suffer the action of the state. For us, the huge difficulty lies on not only having work, this is imposed on our lives. This violent government promotes hate. And there are a huge number of death tolls in the city. They are killing the Amazonia. They are killing the native peoples, the indigenous people. The deforestation in 2019 in Amazonia was equivalent to 9,000 square meters. They actually disappeared. And with them also disappeared the populations, the indigenous, those that understand the forest. And we cannot deal with our work only by looking at what that's happening. Everything is interconnected, as Pope Francis has mentioned. Everything is interconnected, as he mentioned in 2015. This needs to be updated in terms of the action we exert. So I greet the campaign from EI. They call upon us to teach the planet as a whole. At the forest, there are people. We have trees. Here in Brazil, Bolsonaro's fascism, with all their violence, promotes not only the trees' deaths, but also the death of the poor. This week we celebrate the week of indigenous people, the very same peoples. And here in my state, we aim at obtaining the investigation on the part of the police about the death of an indigenous teacher. And this has been, we have been highly invaded by threats. A lot of invaders, workers from the wood industry. Up to now, we have not obtained no investigation on this crime. So for us to defend Amazonia, to defend the environment, it is more than a simple action as ecological activists. It is our duty, the duty of a people. So I agree. I want to salute this decision on the part of EI in launching this campaign. It meets our needs, and we can then continue to fight, believing on behalf of life. That is very important. It brings what Paulo Freire, our main patron, education patron, brought to us. It is necessary to act. We have to pray and to supervise simultaneously. We know that we need to take care of the planet, but we also need to teach that the fact that the planet is ourselves, the trees, the human beings, the animals, the forests, and the peoples who live in there. We need our common ground to serve us all. So from Brazil, our fight at this stage is to remove this government. They are ecocides and genocides. This lack of action in terms of the pandemic is also a result of the way we perform on the environment, isn't it? Our planet suffers daily threats that come not only from climate change, and even species that actually disappear. So this government is ecocide and genocide. So also indigenous peoples are also disappearing. Old indigenous people, it's part of their culture that was not conveyed to youngsters.
Well, Fatima was talking about the situation in her country with a government that is definitely not doing very much for climate change. So in today's post-truth context, what is the role of civics and critical thinking skills in ensuring that students leave school climate literate, so that when you're in a country or wherever you live, that you're able to look at the facts and know what to do?
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Fatima and Kathy. Those are excellent interventions. And I think all of us together are very much saying the same thing, that actually we need to make sure that our politicians are listening. I think I'm quite fortunate in the UK because we've got David Attenborough, and all of our students know the campaigns, especially around plastics. And it means that when it comes to talking about it in schools, our students already know. Our students are already plugged in. And especially being a country that still has links to other parts of the world, thanks to the colonization and empire. And let's not forget, that's how Britain got rich. So let's talk about the history and the impact on the environment and social justice in relation to that. But actually, a lot of our work gets already done because our students are listening to it, thanks to an extent to the BBC, because we trust, and I use the word trust, the BBC as a voice piece of our nation, of our society. But it also means that when our students are engaging with campaigns that are already widely understood, it means that in schools we're able to enhance it, and it's really crucial that we're creating that space where students are able to develop their voices, where they can use those voices to add to the pressure, add to the kind of the pushing to get the government to do the right thing. But we are still always fighting back against the fake news because our students are engaging in the global sphere, the global debates and discussions, and we can't control the internet. As much as we would like to, we can't control it. So it's really important that we're teaching children and young people to be critical thinkers. I think it was Kathy who said about the importance of critical thinking, because if we go by what the governments want us to teach, our children and young people will be taught how to be good workers, how to build the economy, but not how to think, and not how to challenge, and not how to take control back and be empowered. So as schools, we have got that responsibility from the moment they arrive in school in the UK at 5 and 4, for us to start teaching them the power of having that voice, but also making people listen. And if it means doing it en masse, then there's that critical mass of putting pressure on, but also Greta Thunberg, a lot of our children really do look up to her at whatever age. She has shown that you can be the lone voice and you can push and people will listen. And I think it's crucial for us to teach children and young people how to be heard within big P politics, but also small P politics as well, and working with others of the similar campaign groups.
Yeah, no, that's actually a very good point, Michelle. And I wanted to sort of ask the same thing to you, Kathy. Now, how has your teaching and how have your students changed since you started your work?
What a fun question. In 1984, when I started, we didn't talk about this. We talked about the greenhouse effect. We were talking about the science of why, we can live on this beautiful planet. It's temperature controlled and it's the perfect place in space. And it really wasn't until I would say later in the 1990s that we started looking and seeing that we were warming it up. And so that certainly has been a change. Now, one thing that I really try to do is instill a sense of empathy in my students. it's it's not just about them. It's got to be about us as a whole, that interconnectedness that we've been talking about. And so that empathy is really important. But the other part is hope. We don't want to be so dismal about everything that they just feel that they can't change something. So they need to feel empowered. They need to feel like they can make a difference and that we can all work together. So being hopeful, I think, and optimistic, is really, really important, that we can change.
Okay, great. Y Fátima, una pregunta de seguimiento y tenemos muy poco tiempo.
For
Fatima,
you, we
and
don't
I
have
also
much
have a
time.
follow-up question. We're running out of time. Can you explain
What is the key for you as an educator to work when part of the population and when the government is part of the problem? I believe we work on behalf of the students. Knowledge is releasing. We need to convey knowledge on threats over the planet. We need to rally society, and we need to claim from the government. Here in Brazil, for example, we have built a national plan of education with the engagement of all society, represented by all parts of society, and all involving the curriculum. This foresees environmental cross-cutting education, and it takes long to change this reality. Yet, in our country, that is not happening because deniers in the government, they are in denial. They don't let teaching to be of the utmost quality in this regard. So we aim at changing. So there, as a member of parliament that I previously was, there was a law in 2008 that forces us to teach the indigenous people. That is not being enforced. The government is in denial. There are biased judgments all over against black people, against the indigenous peoples. So, but we have this hope that with all the world campaigns, with world pressure, maybe we can modify this. The Brazilian people has woken up. We need to pressure Bolsonaro's government so that we can start a civilizing procedure in this country. The key lies in education. As Paulo Freire put it, education transforms people, and people transform the world.
Fatima, Kathy, and Michelle, for your very compelling insights on a topic that we could spend hours and hours on. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but the takeaway is basically, more education and more involvement. And I want to thank you so much for getting up early, Kathy, in Colorado. And so thank you so much. Muchas gracias, Fatima. Thank you, Michelle. And keep on teaching the students. Want to thank you very much. Now, want to turn over to a very interesting look at one particular topic here where we have Indigenous people are some of the most vulnerable groups in the face of climate change. They are also guardians of tradition and sustainable ways of life in harmony with nature. And Eleanor, a student from the UK and activist in Teach for the Future, interviewed Matua Takawanda Laura's Park from New Zealand on the perspective of Indigenous peoples on climate change and climate change education. Let's take a look.
Kia ora tātou. Ko mata whaura te maunga ko hau te awa ko ngā tipiki ao te iwi. Ko Loris Parker hau. Ko au te matua takawainga I roto I NZI te riuroa. Nau mai, haro mai ki tēnei kōrero. Anei, tētahi tauira, tētahi mokopuna a mātou, hei kōrero mā tātou katoa. Let me introduce Eleanor. Eleanor is a student from the United Kingdom, and she's here to ask questions of me.
Why must Native and Indigenous voices be at the forefront when we talk about the climate, the environment, and protecting the earth?
Kia ora mo tērā, Eleanor. For Native and Indigenous people, everyone who is in that situation are the people that are affected by climate change in the first instance. When we talk about climate change in our organisation, we talk about mātauranga Māui. Mātauranga is knowledge, and Māui is one of our ancestors. Now, we talk about Māui as being the original climate change advocate. He was the person that chased the sun when the sun wouldn't stop and let our people do their tasks over the day. He captured the sun and then negotiated to actually get the sun to slow down. He was also the person that looked for fire, so that fire could be used by our people as well. So Māui is our person who is the advocate for climate change. In every single Native and Indigenous person in the world, they will have stories like that. They will have stories that are intertwined with the land, the sea, the forest, and the people. And that is why it is crucial that Indigenous and Native peoples have that opportunity to have that kōrero in the first instance. They have solutions, and that's the issue which we would like to put to the fore in the first place.
Young people are organising around the world trying to make sure that we have a future. So what can we learn from our ancestors?
I think the first thing you could learn, Eleanor, is what not to do. And for a lot of our ancestors, some of the things that they did and have always done have been put us in the situation that we're in now. When we're talking about kaitiakitanga for us as Native and Indigenous peoples, kaitiakitanga is being a guardian. And if you're a guardian, you have a responsibility to look after the land that you live on, the sea that you actually take your food from, the forest that you gather your food from. So those things that are intertwined in our lives are the reasons why we need to take up those solutions, be they ever so small, from Native and Indigenous peoples, so they can add to the data that we have that will change the climate.
What do you think it is that students could gain if they were taught about the climate crisis within their school?
I think the first thing we should do when we're talking about climate change is, as the elders or the ancestors, to actually stop building that climate of fear. Because actually we have got our young people to the stage where they're fearful of anything to do with climate change. So we need to be thinking quite carefully about what we do into the future. Yes, teach it in schools. Yes, teach the things that are available in our local communities, because we have lots of things that we do already that can be perpetuated into and used by other people. But unless we do something like that, start small and then go on to the next thing that we're going to do. Yes, teach it in schools. Teach it in every place that we possibly can to change people's views about the land, the sea, the forest, and the people.
Thank you for having this conversation with me today. As part of my campaigning, I've always found it really vital to talk with different stakeholders such as teachers and students from elsewhere, and to engage with members of the community. And so it's thanks to this and all the other conversations I've had with other people out there that the campaigns that I'm part of and people around the world are parts of can really progress.
Tēnā koe, Eleanor. Thank you very much for your comments and for the invitation to answer the questions that you put to me. It is important for all students actually to be listening very, very carefully to your kōrero, because it's not only you and me, it's everyone in the world that needs to be involved in this. So ngā mihi kia koe. Kia kaha koe ki te āwhina I tēnei kaupapa I roto I a koe.
Well, hello then, and one of the ways that we can teach our students is through hands-on experience in their local communities, as we see in the next example, which comes to us from Panama. So take a look.
Five of the 7 turtle species nest in Panama. Turtles are very important for marine ecosystems. We are at Playa La Barqueta, which is the most important nesting area for turtles in Panama. Let me show you our project. Due to the threats that turtles face, for example, poaching, predation, erosion of the beach, what we do is we visit the beaches daily and nightly to find their nests and to put the eggs in a safe place. We're part of a group that work towards the conservation of marine turtles. We carry out a different environment education tasks. We work on a voluntary basis. We're motivated because we want the survival of species and we want an increase in the populations. Our project is useful to have more data on the situation of turtles, which are very important for ecosystems. We carry out environmental sensitization at schools and universities. It is one of the things we do in our group to preserve the conservation of turtles. This project has been possible thanks to the help of residents, helps and voluntary people who have joined us in our efforts to conserve turtles. Greetings from La Barqueta Beach. My name is Alexandra Rojas. I study at Guadumal School. I'm 8 years old. What is my opinion about marine turtles? Well, I think that they are the most beautiful and defenseless animals in our oceans. And if we don't look after them now, in the short term, other children will not be able to get to know them. As a member of the Rojas family, we are very happy because over the past 25 years, we have tried to increase the numbers of turtles on our beach. We are cooperation with Aquatma, a foundation which is cooperating with us on this project. I'm part of an environmental group and we're working towards the conservation of this endangered species. My name is Jorge Murgas, and our association is promoting the conservation projects for turtles at Playa La Barqueta. It is important to sensitize around this environmental issue so that this endangered species continues to live. So thank you to our professor, and let us continue with our work.
And now joining us for a discussion on the pedagogy of quality climate change is Dominique Vernier, Advisor for Education for a Sustainable Future, Quebec Labour Congress, Canada, Koen Timmers, educator, researcher, and founder of Project Hakuna, who is in Belgium, and Liz Magda Lopez, teacher and climate activist from Colombia. And joining us also is Juan Blas, who's a professor at the Autonomous University of Chiriquí in Panama. He was the one that put together the video, so I'm going to go ahead and start with him and switch to Spanish. Señor profesor, ¿cómo nació el proyecto?
Professor, how was the project born, and what was the response of the community? The project that we saw in the video. Professor, can you hear me?
Connectivity issues with him down in Panama, so I'm going to go ahead and hope that he comes back. But in the meantime, let me go to Liz Magda. Usted está en una ciudad con una inmensa refinería.
You live in a city with a very big oil refinery in Bermeja, Colombia. So how do you talk about these issues with your students? Good morning to you all. First of all, on behalf of my trade union, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to this event. My school is called El Castillo. It is located in Barranca in Colombia, which is the place where the biggest oil refinery in Colombia is located. So what have we done in our schools? Well, when we teach science, we think that education goes beyond knowledge. We have transformed our pedagogies, and we have tried to become leaders that help promote debate and critical thinking in our students. Our students have learned to carry out research and to analyze the issues that our city is faced with. They've been able to debate and find solutions to our problems, to all these environmental problems that we're facing. In our school, this has been taught through the science and environment lessons. We're part of the project Action for Climate, and thanks to my colleague Kuntaimer, we have been able to cooperate and carry out different activities in our school. And they have had a fabulous response. I think that our school is really a role model. It is showcased as a model in terms of different initiatives that can be carried out. In 2019, we participated in a project where children presented an initiative which has become a standard. It was actually a very simple thing. What the children had to do was to carry out some research and identify the different problems faced by the education institutions. And we came to the conclusion that our main source of concerns was waste. And what we did with the project was to convince children not to use throwaway glasses during the breaks, and so that they could take glasses that they could take back home after school. All right, I have Professor Juan Blas. I think that you're connected now, and thank you very much, Liz Magda, for your comments. First of all, how was your project born, the one we saw in the video? What was the response of your community? Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation, and greetings from Panama. It gives me a great pleasure to participate in this event. This project is the result of the interest of students at the Chile University. People I've been working with from 2014 up to now. And the conservation efforts arose, well, because students wanted all these turtle species to live on. So that was the source of the interest to start working. Playa de la Barqueta is the main nesting area in our region for turtles. So it's only natural for people to be interested in being interested in conserving these species. So this is the hands-on experience linked to the theoretical part that they learned at university. So we have very important human resources, our students, and we also made a very important alliance with a family, which is a member of the community. So we forged a community academic partnership, and we managed to do a lot in very little time.
You created a very impressive network of teachers from around the world engaged in issues of climate change. What are the elements of an engaging, progressive, and participatory curricula?
Well, within education, there's a huge discussion about the role of knowledge and skills, etc. And I think what is really crucial is that you target all of those important skills, creativity, collaboration, even on a global scale, critical thinking, which was already mentioned during the past discussion, I think, problem solving, and also empathy. And for doing that, we need a shift of pedagogy, basically. We need teachers who are able to shift to a different way of teaching. We already heard the past two speakers mentioning projects. So I think that project-based learning and student-centered learning is key in this thing. We have Tony Wagner, who did research about the huge gap between getting a degree and finding a job, and they all mention the same skills. So what I really think is that rather than students only knowing the definition about climate change and memorizing that definition, we also want students to come up with solutions, to take meaningful actions. And in essence, what we really need is that their mindset and their behavior starts to change. And that really, that really requires a different approach, basically. For which I think that teachers need to be trained, for which I think that the teacher needs to know how to activate the students as well, because in this student-centered approach, the teacher has to step outside that comfort zone. And for that, what we did is creating a huge network of teachers who are not only able to share their badge and their certificates and their accomplishments, but also their best practices about content, but also what it's not really working, so their concerns. And I think it's really important that the teachers have a good sense that they are being supported, guided, and that they're able to work with other teachers in a global network. And that is what we try to do with great outcomes, basically. We had students not only coming up with facts and sharing those facts and findings, leading to authentic learning, but we also had them coming up with mind-blowing solutions and actions. And through that network, they were able to inspire each other as well.
Great, thank you so much. Dominique, why do you think quality climate change education needs to be part of a pedagogy anchored in social justice and gender equality with decolonized curricula that is context-specific, culturally relevant, and focused towards action?
Bonjour et merci. À la Centrale des syndicats du Québec, depuis...
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning. Well, since 1993 in our union, we have been focusing on environmental education based on social justice. But with the years, we've realized that the staff, educators, teachers must have the time, the resources, and the required support from their management to be able to deliver quality work. Too often, governments will try to include, to add new subject matters into the curriculum, but it's just adding to what already exists, and then mean that the educators are overloaded, and that is very detrimental, because that way they don't have the possibility to focus on quality environmental education or quality climate change education. We've also realized that the pedagogy has to be developed by the educators. We actually gather 1,500 school institutions in Quebec, and that organization, that association, has been creating deriving from the fact that teachers, educators have shown the will to educate students, children to the environment. And we have used the Paulo Freire pedagogy. It's a pedagogy that feeds hope. This is critical because with regard to climate change, science has shown that this is a critical challenge that could totally disturb the way of living of a future generation, and it could also be very detrimental for the survival of humanity. So it can, so young people can be very anxious, anguished about that. So we really need to teach how to feed hope, because if people are anxious, anguished, they are blocked, they cannot act, or they tend to be to adopt a denial behavior. And we don't want to look at this, because actually that's very scary, and we feel we are not equipped to face that. So we really have to feed the capacities of the young people to take their future on board, to be responsible for their future, and to act for their future. And we should not minimize the risk. We have to be clear. We have to be honest about the reality, and we need to trust the capacity of understanding of the young people that to whom we are teaching. And we also need to reinforce the critical thinking, as has been mentioned. There are a lot of climate skeptical people, so we need to make sure that the young people have the tools to face such people. And the good practices have to be shared between teachers, because if we wait for school manuals, handbooks with the right information, it will never be enough, because everything is changing so quickly. So the staff, educators, teachers should be gathered within a network. And this is precisely what we do in order to pool and share the best practices, the educational activities that develop in their own context with regard to climate change education. And eventually, we also have to walk the talk collectively. So it should not be locked in the classroom. It has to go beyond the classrooms, and in order for young people to have a positive impact on the environment.
In just a few words, what do you think are the core components of quality climate change education? Voy a empezar con usted, Liz Magda. En pocas palabras, ¿cuáles?
I'm going to start by the first speaker. What do you think are the core components of quality climate change education? I think that environmental education has to be flexible, it has to be sexy, interesting, and it also has to leave behind the concepts and theories and become much more practical, collaborative. Children have to learn together. They have to take action, to do activities, different activities which bring together maths and science and all the different subjects, so that they can actually address the problems of climate change. Education has to be horizontal, but it also has to include all the different subjects and all the different areas of knowledge that we need them to develop, so that they also become more creative. We need to think out of the box. We need to be innovative, to leave behind everything we have done until now, so that the students can openly discuss and critically think about everything that is going on. Very good, brilliant. And I'm going to ask the same question to Professor Blas. Which are the core components, according to you, of a quality climate change education? Very, very briefly, because we have almost no time. I totally agree with Liz Magda, with the idea that a school has to be an open place where children can speak freely, and it's also important to be able to put the ideas into practice. We need to make sure that all different students from the early years up to the university can actually make sure that they put into practice, that they actually touch with their own hands everything they're learning through the different subjects. Everything is interrelated. That's something we've mentioned before, but it's important to be able to see that. Okay.
Ask the same question to you, Koen. In just a few words, because we just have a few minutes left, what do you think are the core components of quality climate change education?
I think we need a good synergy between a teacher and the students. We need a teacher being a pedagogical engineer who has the right facts and background, but also knows how to bring this to the students. And we need young students being scientists, journalists, and activists at the center of their learning process, basically.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And the same question to you, Dominique, in real short words. What do you think are the core components of quality climate change education?
Mais en fait, c'est une éducation qui nous...
It's an education that nurtures the hope. It's an education developed by the educators themselves, and the best practices have to be shared.
Professor Juan Blas, Liz.
Thank you, Professor Blas. Thank you, Ligmata.
And Dominique, this has been very interesting. Thank you for sharing with us and for the work that you do every day with our students. Muchas gracias a ustedes por participar con nosotros.
Thank you very much to everyone for participating in this session.
In Morocco, quality climate change education is a priority. Education International member organization SNECDT will now share their experience in driving climate action through education. Dalila El Barmi, Arab Countries Coordinator for Education International, joins us for a conversation with Yunus Fidanchi, International Secretary and National Union Bureau member, SNE CDT from Morocco. Let's watch.
Bonjour, aujourd'hui nous avons avec nous Younes Ferrachine.
The interpreter is sorry, but the sound is not good. There is a sound issue. So thank you for inviting us to have that interview within the framework of the International Education Campaign called Teaching for the Planet. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. As I was saying, the SNECDT started working on education on climate change by developing a program dating back to 2016. 2016 is a key year. At that time, Morocco received the COP21 conference, and there was an impulse for the unions who started working on that issue. Morocco is one of the leading countries in the region and mainly unions of the region. So without further ado, I will give you the floor, Younes. So could you please give us a few words about the program? Good morning. Thank you, Dalila. Thank you to the Education International for inviting me. So the topic at stake is key, is critical. As you've said, Morocco received a COP21 and 22 conference in Marrakesh, and in 2016. Since 2016, we have more and more integrated that question in our union. It's a mainstream question now because it's important to give the union perspective on this. Thank you very much for that introduction, Younes. So as I've said, you have developed a very interesting program. And in your program, we've seen that one of the objectives of the program is to include education on climate change in all the national educational systems. So that brings me back to my question. Is education on climate change taught in all the schools in Morocco? And if so, is it considered as a priority? The curricula in Morocco make it possible to educate on the environment, to deliver educational, environmental education, including sport education, so in parallel with other subject matters. And it is based on cognitive and spiritual approaches as well, aiming at achieving basic knowledge and skills on the environment. And in order to popularize the concept of sustainable development among young people, among children, and among and through them among their parents. In 2006, we launched a school program which is an educational tool. The objective is to teach the notions of sustainable development and ways of living that respect the environment. So it's an international program developed by the Foundation for Education to the Environment. But in spite of all this, well, it's been an effort made by the civil society mainly. So the topic of climate change education is not yet a priority in our school curricula in Morocco. Thank you, Eunice. And okay, a last question for the purpose of time. And it's been a pleasure to listen to you. And I will ask a question in relation with the first one. As a union movement, as a world movement, what can we do to make sure that the responses to the climate change won't continue the injustice? Well, as a union movement, we have to fight and fight back. And we need to undertake a detailed reflection in order to have in order to make sure that education to climate change, education to the environment would contribute to more respect and to a better world, and in accordance with the environmental, social and health standards. And the answers must come from a consensus reached within the framework of the social dialogue. So with regard to the impact on employment, it is clear that the climate change will also bring about changes in the economic sectors. The policies relating to aiming at decreasing greenhouse gas emissions have an indirect impact on the labor market. Because that disturbs the labor market. So altogether, all the stakeholders have to start thinking together about a just transition, a transition that respects human rights as well as the fundamental rights of workers. Means health and safety at work, on the workplace, the non-discrimination, etc. So the climate change will be exacerbated, but we need to act together through an efficient participation of everyone, and including the impacted communities, and they have to take part in the decision-making process and in the follow-up of climate change actions. Education unions and unions as a whole in general are in a good position to represent the voice of these groups and communities that will be severely affected by the climate change. So we need indeed to have a tripartite dialogue to make sure that there is a good, just transition. So thank you very much, Eunice.
The answers have to take account of the most vulnerable groups. And these groups are represented by unions, so union voice has to be taken account of. So thank you very much, Eunice, for your time, for having expressed the voice of certain countries. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. And thank you for continuing our companion, and I would like to have people be invited to follow our summit. So thank you very much indeed.
Now, climate change education must be part of the curricula at every level, starting with the earliest years. And we now welcome renowned children's author Amalia Lowe, who will share a reading of her book, El Corazón de la Tierra, The Heart of the Earth, a book she wrote to inspire children. Let's watch now.
Soy Amalia Lowe, escritora.
My name is Amalia Lowe, writer and illustrator of children's books. I want to talk to you about my book, The Heart of the Earth. In this book, I speak about the possibility to transform our world. In this book, Condor, which symbolizes the Earth's soul, is very ill because he has a dream. He dreams of a planet which is a paradise. But he realizes that the world has been destroyed and is overcome by sadness, destruction, and war. So he becomes so ill that he's very close to dying. The only thing that can save him is a golden and mysterious sphere, the heart of the earth. His friend, the leopard of the Andes, courageously goes looking for the heart of the earth. On her way, she is accompanied by Hokumadi, the bear with glasses. After many adventures, where they solve many problems, and where they make many friends, they still do not find the heart of the earth, and the condor will die. But just when they're going to hit a rock bottom and they start losing heart, they realize that all the friends that they met along the way want to accompany them to visit Condor. And magically, thanks to this visit, the Condor starts feeling better. Let me read how this story ends with the healing of the earth that I dream of. Condor, can I ask you something? How do you get well? I couldn't find the heart of the earth for you. In fact, the heart of the earth was not that golden sphere that I was dreaming of, but rather the invisible fire that makes us happy. The heart of the earth is love amongst friends and the love of the beautiful earth that we live on. Ha ha ha. Condor, there's something strange going on. There's an image coming out of your head. Oh, it is the image of my dream. It became as big as the whole sky, and it's coming down. It's covering the whole planet. I think your dream has become true. Our Earth is paradise. Let's go enjoy paradise. Bye. Bye. Bye, my friends. Look at Simba. The condor is flying again. What a beautiful adventure. I hope that all the children who read my book remember what the condor said. The heart of the earth is the love among all the friends and the love of the beautiful earth that we live on. Greetings.
Planet, a global education summit, the event you're watching right now, is part of a bigger movement, a larger movement. Education International, the global voice of the teaching profession, is also working with partners in the student movement and with social and racial justice activists to create the green future we need. Earth Rising and the Hip Hop Caucus also held summits, and we are now joining us to add their voices to those of teachers around the world. Welcome, Brooke Nelson and Nikisha Glover. I'm going to ask both of you the same question. What are your demands, and how do you see your community of activists working with educators? And let me go ahead and start with you, Brooke. Brooke, are you there? Looks like we're having some technical issues. I think you're muted, Brooke, if you want to unmute yourself.
Does it work now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
No,
So,
well, you know, the technical issues, you know how it is. So I wanted to, so let me go ahead and repeat the question to you. What are your demands and how do you see your community of activists working with educators?
So at our summit, youth from all over the world, we created 10 demands that are going to be presented to the Biden administration's climate team and all COP26 negotiators, and then also the World Leaders Summit being held by President Biden tomorrow. So our demands are countries increase their commitment to the Paris agreements to be in line with keeping our planet under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, no new fossil fuel infrastructure, and that all existing fossil fuel extraction must be ceased. The inclusion of BIPOC, women, the disabled, and people most impacted by the climate crisis in all high-level climate conversations and policies. Countries aggressively reduce their carbon emissions to stop all leakage and end all foreign exploitation and neocolonialism. All corporations hold accountable industries that contribute and cause climate disasters. The immediate planning and implementation of sustainable and equitable food systems. That world leaders officially acknowledge climate migrants and establish policies to ensure they are protected and can migrate safely. That governments recognize and institute mechanisms in the 30 by 30 global agenda, which will defend and protect indigenous territory and communities. That world leaders create policies to protect activists' right to peacefully protest and safeguard our democracies around the world. And that intersectional and comprehensive climate education in all primary and secondary schools, including climate justice and environmental racism, indigenous wisdom, historical movements, green careers, and sustainability is taught. So our way we can work with educators is that our activists have spoken at the United Nations. Some of our activists has been silenced as their protest while they try and protest for a better future. And regardless of who they are and where they come from, all of us are working together on solutions to protect our future. And that's the same for our wonderful educators. We want to fight for a better future. Us youth, we can work with you amazing educators to amplify our message and share with other youth. Educators are educating the next generation. I've seen it so many times with my teachers or my mother who's a teacher and the immense impact she has on her students. You can make climate education and justice part of your classroom and be an example for your students on how to be an activist.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Brooke. I wanted to ask the same question to you, Nikisha. What are your demands and how do you see your community of activists working with educators? And I think we're still, Nikisha, are you able to join us? Can you see me? I think we're still having a little bit of a technical difficulty with you, Nikisha. Well, I wanted to ask you, Brooke, while we're still looking to see if we can get Nikisha on, what you mentioned, Biden is going to be talking about this tomorrow. What exactly is it? You give us a little bit of detail on that.
Yeah, so our summit, we will have a delegate from our summit at the Biden World Leaders Summit tomorrow, and that person will be delivering our demands to all the world leaders in attendance during their speech. And then additionally, we have our big demand list with all the justification and background information. We've done all the work for them. So that will also be delivered to people on the Biden climate team to make sure that the Biden administration really is hearing our demands, because it's not just American youth, it's youth from all over the world. And these are really important steps for all of us if we can implement, as the professor from Morocco was saying before, a just transition for all of us and really safeguard our future.
Okay, thank you so much, Brooke. Let's see if we can get Nikisha back on. Nikisha, are you there? We're still...
I'm here. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Well, I wanted to ask you, what are your demands?
Everyone.
Good morning, Nikisha. I wanted to ask you, what are your demands and how do you see your community of activists working with educators?
Our demands from the We Shall Brief Summit,
it looks like we're still having some technical difficulties with Nikisha. Maybe we can bring her back later on in one of the segments. But in the meantime, I want to thank you, Brooke, for joining us. And we'll see if we can bring Nikisha back. And we look forward to working together to ensure quality climate education becomes fundamental as teaching, reading, and writing. And I've had a wonderful time sharing with you today. And unfortunately, my time is up. So it's time to welcome Andrew Jack, Global Education Educator from the Financial Times, who will be moderating our third and final segment. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us. And I bid everybody goodbye.
Thank you very much, Patricia. So Andrew Jack from the Financial Times here. A great pleasure to be with you for this really important day to focus on really the key issue for the coming generation. So we've heard a lot already about education, international's action in the movement for climate education. And we've heard about educators who are standing up for the planet and for their students. Now we're going to hear a bit more from global leaders and other key sectors of society, including student movements, trade union confederations, and UNESCO, and their support for the Teach for the Planet campaign.
Teach for the planet. There's no doubt we are in a climate emergency. We have twin crises, massive inequality, underfunding, as you know, of our vital public services, healthcare, education, childcare, aged care. Yet we also know if we don't fight for investment in jobs, for rights, for social protection for our people, right alongside of the environment, the planet itself, then we don't have a future. We don't have a secure or sustainable future for our children and grandchildren. Massive climate events now, weather events that are so extreme they're destroying lives and livelihoods, are a daily occurrence. But your stand, the demand of all of your governments to put quality climate education in our public schools, to train teachers, to fund the environments that make this learning possible, that's something the ITUC stands right behind you with. We want just transition, climate action with just transition, with unions at the table. And your table is indeed a very serious, responsible one, educating our youth for the future. They'll be fighters right alongside of us in generations to come. Teach for the planet. We need quality curriculum for climate education now.
We support Teach for the Planet because we need to build an education system where every student leaves school climate literate. In order to do this, education planners and teachers must seek to integrate climate change education in curricula at all levels. Climate literacy empowers students with geographic, scientific, and political knowledge about the Earth's climate system. In each discipline, the humanities, social studies, and scientific inquiry, education about the climate's influence on our societies and global community is paramount. This enables students to make responsible and just decisions for a sustainable planet in the workplace, communities, and other learning spaces. A climate literate student may lead local actions for change and sustainability, but they are also aware that the Earth is a common inheritance of all peoples. Climate literate students are globally conscious, understand the adverse impacts of northern industrial development on southern seashores. They fight to protect oceans, mountains, and forests. They see the interconnectedness of struggles, anti-racism, women's rights, a sustainable global economic order, and the cultural and political recognition of Indigenous peoples and their knowledges. Let us join together to teach for the planet.
Greetings from UNESCO. I warmly congratulate our friends at Education International on launching this very important campaign. Well, in a global survey recently conducted by UNESCO, 67% of respondents said that climate change and biodiversity loss are the top challenges we face. They also identified education as one of the top solutions to address climate change. For this to happen, learners and teachers need to be empowered to understand and address the sustainability challenges, for sure. This is about knowledge, this is about skills, values, attitudes, geared to caring for our endangered planet. Taking care is the key word to say. Well, teachers are at the front line of guiding students on this journey of awareness and action. Through our advocacy, through our training and resources on climate changes education, we support teachers to make learning transformational. Educators are a priority in the new global framework on education for sustainable development, ESD for 2030 for short. As the UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development next month, we will call for commitment to transform education so that everyone can learn for our planet and act for sustainability. It's about acting and thinking differently in this century. We'll elevate the voices of educators calling for change and looking forward to collaborating to ensure climate education is in the spotlight at COP26 in November. Teaching and learning for the planet is not a choice. It's our collective responsibility to give the custodians of our future all they need to grow up and thrive as green, responsible citizens. I thank you very much.
So thanks for those messages. And you just heard Stefania Giannini from UNESCO saying, teaching and learning for the planet is not a choice, it's a collective responsibility. So in order to bring about those sorts of changes, to focus to fight for climate change and support the just transition to a more sustainable world, there will need to be a transformation in education. And that's what we're going to talk about in this final session today. The needs for teachers and unions to work with governments to include quality climate education for education itself in the classroom, integrated into their systems in every country. That should be part of countries' climate promises and commitments on a credible timescale. So the United Nations is organizing the COP26 Climate Change Conference, which begins at the start of November. Countries will come together and review their commitments to combat climate change. And Scotland is the host country. So we're joined in this next panel discussion by Larry Flanagan, the General Secretary of the Educational Institute of Scotland, and Minister John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills in Scotland. And they'll share with us their thoughts on why this conference, COP26, is important and what it means for education unions and for quality climate education. Welcome to both of you, Larry and John. And maybe let me start by asking you both, what does COP26, why does it matter to the education sector? John.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and it's a great pleasure to take part in this conversation through Education International. COP26 matters for our education system because fundamentally we have to ensure that young people are equipped to meet the challenges of the ever-changing world in which we are living. And climate change is one of those fundamental challenges, the most fundamental challenge that we all face in the forthcoming period. So we have to make sure that young people are equipped with an understanding of the issues, and from that they can form their commitments and influence the commitments of society to tackle this very significant issue. And obviously we have a unique relationship with the COP26 because it will take place in the city of Glasgow in Scotland, rescheduled because of COVID. But we hope it's going to be able to take place on a face-to-face basis and provide a landmark agreement that can tackle climate change.
Thanks, John. And we'll come back on those points. But Larry, what's your perspective? So why does COP26 matter for education?
Well, I would echo John's points, and essentially for us here in Scotland, COP26 is a real opportunity to consolidate and reinvigorate the work which has already been undertaken, because education for sustainability has been a key part of our curriculum here in Scotland for over a decade now, the Curriculum for Excellence. But having an event like COP26, I think, does allow us to use it as a catalyst for re-energising that agenda. I think everyone understands that education is the key to the future, and tackling climate change is about the future. So particularly in our schools, with the enthusiasm of young people in relation to the need to tackle climate change, then this is a real opportunity for us here in Scotland, but also, I think, globally. COP26 allows us to reset and reinvigorate the campaign to tackle climate change as effectively as possible, and we're certainly looking forward to it. I come from Glasgow, so it's my home city, and we're looking forward to the opportunity to host the world around this very important bill.
So John, as a minister, what's your commitment then to make education visible at COP26? What are you going to do?
I think, as Larry mentioned, the whole issue of considering questions around sustainability have been at the heart of Scotland's curriculum. We made a conscious decision over a decade ago to move our curriculum to ensure that it equipped young people with the skills, the knowledge and the attributes, the capacities that would enable them to deal with the world as they find it. And of course, climate change is a central part in that challenge. So the presence of COP26 within Scotland brings that curriculum to life for young people. We've taken forward for some time a Learning for Sustainability strategy, and that provides opportunities for young people to learn and to understand about questions of sustainability. So that's a thread that runs through our curriculum, and we will be encouraging and motivating a focus within our schools on the issues that emerge that are part of the preparation for COP26 and what emerges from COP26. Now, obviously, that fits in very closely with the policy agenda of the government on tackling climate change in its widest sense. And again, going back over a decade, the Scottish Parliament enacted by law some of the most demanding targets for tackling climate change. They are essentially the most demanding of any jurisdiction in the world. And we are having to work hard to adapt and change our systems to enable us to comply with those targets. So I think what COP26 provides us with an opportunity to do is to share the progress that we have made in Scotland, but then also to be challenged about what more needs to be done, because all of us need to change practices and approaches to enable us to tackle this very significant issue.
So, John, COP26 is obviously a symbolic event to crystallize a lot of these discussions, but will you carve out, for example, during the event or in some parallel sessions, the opportunities for teachers and the education community to very actively engage with the debates and discussions?
Yes, and we'll want to do that. We have, as a government, taken an approach to maximise the widest possible engagement with the issues around COP26. So we are creating opportunities. Obviously, still a little bit uncertain because of the implications of COVID as to what will be the physical format of those arrangements, but we are structuring a whole engagement programme so that different sectors of our society can be involved in those discussions. We want to make sure that educators and also young people are very much at the heart of that discussion, and that they have the opportunity to influence our thinking as we prepare for COP26, but also to interact with colleagues from around the globe who will be coming to Glasgow for what will be an absolutely central event in tackling climate change.
And Larry, both you and John have mentioned that point about how the Scottish curriculum has already been integrating issues of sustainability and climate change for some time. That said, do you still see some scope for increasing that? And what are the tensions, kind of balancing it with existing curricula and teacher priorities? Larry?
I think that there's a huge challenge around fitting everything into the curriculum, and it's a constant dialogue that we're having. But I think the learning for sustainability is a cross-curricular feature, and it's something that we want to embed into the daily life of our schools. There's a government agency, Education Scotland, which oversees curriculum. And as John indicated here, we're in dialogue with them so that across the COP summit, we have something taking place in every school in the country where staff and pupils are engaged in addressing and considering the main themes of the COP summit. So there's no single agency here which has possession of this precious agenda. And one of the things that we try to do in Scotland is to work collaboratively, wherever possible, on agreed aims. And certainly I think in terms of tackling climate change, then we're in a strong place to make sure that our education system is preparing young people for a future in which this particular agenda is tackled effectively. So, across a whole range of areas, there's a lot of work ongoing, all of which creates a synergy around a better future for our children and young people.
John, anything to add on building that extra headroom to integrate still further and advance curriculum integration around sustainability and climate change beyond what Scotland's done already?
Obviously, we're constantly revisiting as a government in relation to our wider policy agenda the commitments that we are making on climate change, and as each piece of research takes its course, the challenge becomes ever more significant and serious for all of us. So we're constantly revisiting that agenda. And we're in the midst of an election campaign just now, just shortly before Parliament rose for the election. We submitted our updated climate plans to Parliament. And a significant part of them requires changes in public behaviour and public approaches, particularly around transport, around how we generate our energy, how we utilise our resources. And these will be decisions and issues influenced for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And we therefore need to make sure that our education system is equipping young people with the outlook and the perspectives to enable them to tackle these issues effectively and to be essentially willing partners and collaborators in how this is taken forward. Now, one of our core approaches within the Scottish education system is a model of collaboration between the teaching trade unions, members of staff, the government, our local authority partners, our specialist agencies, to make sure that we are all influential in forming the agenda. And I think the conversations that have taken place involving all partners, particularly our professional association colleagues, have been helpful in shaping how we can make the biggest impact of COP26 on our education system, and therefore see that as an investment in many of these challenges and meeting these challenges in the years to come.
And what do you see as the potential for greater cooperation between the government and the education unions around climate change?
I think the opportunities are essentially about making sure that our teachers are professionally equipped to lead this challenge and to lead it at all levels within our education system. And that's where we work most closely with the professional associations, because they are great allies, as well as being teaching trade unions. They are professional associations. They are allies in the further enhancement of the professional capability of teachers. And one of my central priorities as Education Secretary has been to make sure that the teaching profession is supported, that we invest in the profession. We've expanded the profession. There are commitments to further expand the profession in the years to come, and to deepen the professional learning opportunities that are central to realise many of these aspects of the agenda. So working with the professional associations on professional learning is a central part of what I want to take forward.
And Larry, building on that theme, what would you say in terms of the social dialogue and the engagement between government and the unions around climate change? What more can we see, and how's progress been to date?
Yeah, so we do have a good track record of social dialogue in Scotland, and I think it's important to underline that doesn't mean that we are in agreement at all times. There is challenge within that, and that's the best way to have social dialogue, because if you're just sitting in a room having a conversation and ticking a box and walking away, that does little. But we are actively engaged as the professional voice of teachers in shaping the agenda, and education for sustainability is really a shared agenda across the board. To get teachers engaged, or to deliver any curricular initiative, you need to have teacher engagement. And one of the things that we have done in the past around tackling poverty, for example, is to use our position as the EIS, as the teacher trade union, to co-sponsor a whole range of initiatives, which then give an endorsement to that in a kind of social partnership framework. And I think that's really important, because I could point to other parts of the UK where teacher unions are advocating for tackling climate change, and there's rhetoric at government level, but the two pathways don't seem to merge. And what we're trying to do in Scotland is actually synergise all of the energies so that we have a kind of single focus on developing an effective strategy, particularly around education, because I think we all recognise the importance of education to taking this campaign forward.
John, I mean, does something have to give in all this, though? I mean, we've seen it already with COVID, of course, huge extra stresses on teachers coping with the shift to online and all the disruptions that have been caused, and now the health-related measures. I mean, is there any similar trade-off around trying to integrate and engage much more on climate change with schools? How do you find the resourcing and the support to allow teachers and unions to involve themselves more in this?
There will always be a congestion within the curriculum, and what I certainly am conscious of is the need to be constantly. You can't take the view that you've removed the congestion from the curriculum and that's it all done. It'll start creeping back in again as soon as you've turned your back. So we have to make clear our priorities. I think one of the central features of the curricular reform that we undertook in Scotland was essentially relied upon the professional judgment of teachers to consider how they could deploy the curriculum effectively to ensure that young people acquired the capacities they need to deal with the world as they find it. Now, any judgment in that respect would say to you, young people must leave our education system with a deep understanding of climate change because of the seriousness for the future of our society. So it's a really central priority, and around that, judgments have to be made about how time is spent and how that prioritisation can be undertaken. There's a lot of debate just now during the election campaign about the investment in the teaching profession, and particularly around professional learning, and it's something to which I'm very committed, and we've got a good track record in supporting that professional learning, but there is more we need to do to assist in that respect. I suppose the final point I would say is that many of the judgments that have to be made in this respect are about trying to win the argument about what really matters in our society and focusing our education system on those essential challenges. And I think if we have an honest and open discussion about that, then we can perhaps come to the correct conclusions. And obviously, as we handle that within the post-COVID environment, or then it's not quite a post-COVID environment, but we're getting to a better place on COVID in Scotland today. We are in a position to focus on how we support the profession to lead education recovery and to build on what's been, I think, by all common acknowledgement, a formidable effort by the teaching profession to make sure that young people were in no way harmed educationally by the issues that have arisen out of COVID.
And Larry, just tell us briefly, what's Education International Scotland planning around COP26? Any particular initiatives?
Well, I think there's a whole range of initiatives taking place from different organisations. I know the EIS, for example, even at a city level in Glasgow, are working with other social partners to try and make sure that post the summit, we have a better public transport system in the city, so there's a lasting legacy. Education International clearly intend to have a presence there and to make sure there's a profile around education. I'm also the European president of the Education International organisation, and I know that ETUS tomorrow and Friday are holding a Education for Sustainability conference. So there's a lot of levels in which we've been involved. I think one of the big issues here, certainly for us in the EIS here in Scotland, is that this is an area where our members can be involved in EIS as a trade union, in social partnership with the Scottish Government and other agencies, but also just professionally in the classroom. Because the third partner, I think, here are the young people themselves in our schools. This is a topic that is really important to them. And as any teacher will tell you, engaging your students in something that interests them is the first step in taking them forward. And the pandemic has shown how important schools are to young people's well-being and mental good health. So I think this is an agenda which will engage young people, and we've seen them on the streets taking action before. So this is an open door we're pushing at in terms of getting young people on board, and they're the critical third leg of the tripod in terms of the kind of partnership we want to see working in our schools, so that somewhere down the line we are making progress in terms of tackling climate change and creating a future for our young people.
John, only got a few seconds left, but what are your expectations overall then for the outcomes of COP26?
I think it depends very much on the attitudes that countries bring to COP26. I hope countries come with commitments. I think we're in a much better position to make more progress because of the change of presidency in the United States. And the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has already had discussions with John Kerry as President Biden's climate envoy. And I think that signals a fantastic change in engagement from the United States. That's an encouraging sign, and we need to make sure that's replicated by everyone. And I certainly can say on behalf of Scotland that we will be providing a very warm welcome to make sure that the summit takes place in the most supportive conditions and circumstances to make sure it makes the most progress on such an important issue.
And you touched on this at the start, but aside from the practicalities of COVID limitations, do you think there's actually a value in trying to do more online to limit the carbon footprint actually of people even attending to Glasgow?
I think there is. Ultimately, some of these events need interaction. I think all of us are finding that we've lived our lives through digital technology for the last 12 months fundamentally, and it's been helpful, and it's got us through a really difficult period, but it's also been tough. And we need human interaction and human dialogue. I'm certainly getting a lot of that during the election campaign, where I'm out and about, now able to speak to voters on their own doorsteps, which is really invigorating. I didn't realise how much I had missed actually being able to talk to people face to face. So I think there's a place, Andrew, for both, for digital technology to try to reduce the carbon footprint and to make as much progress in advance of COP26, but some face-to-face dialogue to make sure that we all sign a bond amongst human beings to do all that we can to tackle climate change.
So John and Larry, thank you both very much indeed for that. It's really important to talk about the engagement with government and the opportunity of COP26 to focus and catalyse on these really essential issues around climate change. Now we're moving to the final section of the event, and we're going to turn now to David Edwards, the General Secretary of Education International, and Kathleen Rogers, the President of Earth Day, the partner for this event. They're going to discuss a manifesto being launched today, which expresses the demands of teachers and educators from around the world. The Education International Quality Climate Change Education for All manifesto was developed through consultation with education unions around the world, and it's the voice of educators. David, you're joining us first. Hello there.
Hello, Andrew.
Hi. So tell us, why did Education International develop this manifesto?
Well, Andrew, as many of you were involved in last year before the COVID pandemic, we remember when our students decided they needed to take to the streets in order to get government's attention around climate change. And we as a teaching profession joined them. We are the ones who were teaching them. And we thought it was really important that we clarify very clearly, put up what climate change education is, why they have a right to both a future but also the knowledge and the skills. And so the executive board, the membership all came together to be very clear and put forth exactly what that meant in a manifesto that can now be shared with the Biden summit and also world leaders, education ministers right around the world.
And what are the key messages of the manifesto, David?
Well, the first one is, Andrew, that we need to make sure that quality climate change education is part of the climate commitments that are going to be made in the lead up to COP and at COP. Not as an aside, but as a central commitment in the NDCs. But we also need to make sure that every student leaves education climate literate. We need to be very clear about that. So we have to talk about climate literacy and the curriculum. So quality climate change education based on science. But as you've heard throughout this whole entire summit, it has to also address the ethical, cultural, political, social, and economic dimensions of climate change. That's absolutely essential for the world's educators. The teachers are trained and supported. You heard talk about why we need in terms of professional development, teacher education, and support. And that schools themselves and learning environments are transformed to support quality climate change education in all aspects.
Thanks very much. Let's turn briefly now to Kathleen Rogers from Earth Day. Hello, Kathleen.
Hi.
Hello. So tell us, why is 2021 such a critical year for action to promote climate change education?
Well, I think as your previous speakers mentioned, the U.S. absence from the climate agreement and our, the next COP, which will happen, we hope, sometime in the end of 2021, is a really important moment to include climate literacy in the NDCs or in the climate agreement itself, principally because we believe that without climate literacy, and for decades, our organization's 52 years old, and for decades, we've felt that climate literacy and education was the poor stepchild of our movement. And without climate literacy, those countries that are most vulnerable, those populations that are most vulnerable, without teaching climate literacy, without preparing them for the jobs of the future, we will not see the equity and inclusion that we've all been talking about. So we're hoping all of those issues can be included at the next COP. We also have many other meetings that we're looking at throughout the year as an opportunity to promote what's happened here today. And I cannot say enough about the work of Teach for the Planet and what David is doing here, and the manifesto, which is very far-reaching and very forward-thinking. So we're extremely proud to be part of that effort. I think the other important part of this is, in addition to the COP and the global meetings, we have to focus on funding. We have to make sure that those countries that depend on outside resources, to whatever extent they do, also don't see their normal education funding in any way diminished, but instead adding additional funding so that teachers' curricula changes can be made, so it can be fully integrated across all the platforms that our incredible teachers deal with every single day of their lives. So we're looking at funding the convention, the Conference of the Parties, and other mechanisms for promoting what David has set down an amazing road today.
And any other specific collaborations you're proposing between Earth Day and Education International, Kathleen?
Well, certainly we have a formidable network of organizations. We have at least 150,000, 250,000 organizations, 25,000 mayors, principals, school administrators, and teachers. So because of the great work of Education International, we are prepared to put our entire network behind what has been proposed today in support of the manifesto and the goals. So we're very excited to be working with them and intend to put a huge amount of resources into this. We also think we can show up at the Conference of the Parties, as we just heard from all those amazing videos, with at least a growing mass of countries, hopefully a critical mass of countries that will support this so we can get formal action at the COP. But between our network and the amazing teachers that are part of the unions of Education International, I think we have a pretty good combination of forces to put to bear on this issue.
So Kathleen and David, thanks very much for joining us in this effort to transform education to support a just transition to a more sustainable world. So we're almost at the end of the event today. We're going to hear in a second from a number of countries, education ministers of South Africa, Argentina, and Norway, who are partnering with teachers and their unions to make climate education a fundamental part of their system. And we'll show that now, and then we'll hear from David for his closing remarks.
Greetings to educators of the world and to the unions which represent your voice. My name is Angelina Matsie Mutsecha. I'm the Minister of Basic Education in the Republic of South Africa, the land teeming with sunshine, mineral wealth, and warmth of a beautiful people. Climate change is the greatest threat of our time, and we believe that education is a powerful and transformative tool critical for a sustainable future. It is, after all, education, so said our Nobel Prize laureate, our first President Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "Education is the greatest weapon we can use to change the world," close quote. Thus, climate change education is no different. The work we do today is a gift to prosperity. It's not for ourselves, but crucial for the survival of our planet. So quality education must provide students with the skills, with knowledge, and inspiration to take action in every community. We made clear commitments as part of the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. We remain committed to ensuring that climate change education is included in education policy, curricula, and teacher training. And we are glad to see the teachers and educators of the world standing up for the planet and taking action in every corner of the world with their students and communities. We support Education International in your campaign for quality climate change education for all. We will work hand in hand with teachers and their organizations to make the future we dream of, the future we need, a reality for all. In conclusion, I quote again, Mandela once opined, "Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great today." So I say to you, be that generation. It is a moral imperative to stem the tide of climate change through education. Let's do it together now, and I thank you.
Mi nombre es Nicolás Trota, soy ministro de Educación.
My name is Nicolás Trota, Minister for Education in Argentina. I would like to thank Education International for giving me the floor. And I want to share with you our work program for Argentina. Our country has been heavily hit by the pandemic, but we're also committed with tackling the great inequalities that exist in Argentina as a part of the most unequal continent, not the poorest continent. I think that we need a new educational agenda that transforms the world for all our children, and it should be the driver for social changes in all our countries. We have to reflect on the importance of schools when it comes to looking after our planet. We must be very clear as to the role that each school must have, and the role that everyone must have in order to change our mindset regarding this massive challenge, alongside with poverty and hunger. The work that we carry out in our classrooms allows us to change people's mindset as to the role that our communities must play, the role that our children must play, and the impact that we hope that our children should have in order to change their families. For us, it is very important to take a step forward and adopt a climate action bill, which has already been adopted in Congress. It has been promoted by the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Environment, and we hope that in the next few weeks it will also be ratified by the Senate and promulgated by the state. With that law, our government and also the provincial governments will be entitled, or will have the responsibility to bring environment education and climate change education at all levels of education, in order to change mentalities so that people look after the environment. And because we want to promote a harmonious development with equal access to opportunity, with equal access to wealth. And in our countries, it is very important to have that debate, because what we can see across the planet is that peripheral countries like ours should never be faced with a dilemma, as if we had to choose between development or environment. We need a new approach that will bring this dual way of looking at things, focusing on the environment and on development. Our government is fully committed at all international fora, because we want to have a shared understanding throughout Latin America as regards looking after the planet. And as a government, we want to have an educational agenda towards that goal. We also want to acknowledge the role of all teachers across the world for their engagement and commitment in these difficult times. And I also want to acknowledge the role of Education International and all education trade unions in the different corners of the world, which always defend a public education as a way of transforming society and of striving for a better future. Thank you very much. El cambio climático.
Natural environments are the greatest threats of our time. We all need to step up our work to ensure a safe and healthy future. And I believe that education is a vital, powerful, and transformative tool to ensure a sustainable future. Education for sustainable development is crucial now and in the years to come. Quality education must provide students with the experiences, skills, knowledge, and inspiration to take action in every community. Norway has made a clear commitment to the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. We remain committed to ensure that education for sustainable development is included in the education policy, curricula, and teacher training. I'm encouraged to see teachers and educators of the world standing up for the planet and taking action in every corner of the world with their students and communities. We support Education International in your campaign for quality education for sustainable development for all. We will work hand in hand with teachers and their unions to make the future we dream of, the future we need, a reality for all.
And now we actually have a special video message from John Kerry, who is the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate and will be hosting and organizing the Biden Summit tomorrow in conversation with Earth Day's founder, Dennis Hayes.
What role do you see civil education and climate literacy playing in creating a deeply informed public constituency that will remain steadfast for the decades that we require to solve the climate crisis?
Well, it's absolutely critical, Dennis, to have basically informed and educated population. We have a challenge with respect to people's acceptance or ability to find the truth in our country. We used to have a better set of referees and a better acceptance of some of the arbiters of that. Today, we just have a clash and denial, a level of denial that has partially been paid for by very large entities, corporate entities and others who have bought into this process where they've distorted truth over many, many years. That climate crisis isn't happening, that there is no such thing as climate change, that there's no such impact and so forth. How many times have people heard that in one place or another? And science has been defied with this process. So how do you fight back against it? Helping the educators to find a curriculum, to find a pedagogy by which they could teach people the fundamentals of good choices about the environment. If we could find a way to have more and more people able to go and find sources which they know are impeccable with respect to their adherence to the science, to the truth, and you can really get good information. I think that's an imperative for any democracy. You can't have a really good functioning democracy if you cannot create consensus around truth. And we're going to have to really fight to regain that capacity here in our own country.
Consensus around truth. Colleagues, we are just so happy and proud to launch our climate change education campaign here, Teach for the Planet, with the Earth Day. We share a focus on the future, on young people, and the critical importance of education. And as many have said today, when we talk about climate change in the era of COVID, there's one important parallel. The world is interdependent, and there is no real safety for one country or group of people until we are all safe. And there's a challenge here to pedagogy, to be able not only to adequately portray the dire circumstances, but to empower students to place themselves at the center of potential solutions. We don't lack scientific understanding or technical ability to deal with climate change. We simply haven't mobilized the will. It's not so much denial as it is deferral. We've allowed ourselves to turn away from the facts and the solutions. So it's really important to be completely transparent at this late hour for our planet. No combination of professional educators or activist students or environmental experts or activists is going to save us. The responsibility lies with governments. Only the commitments and actions of governments, led by the expressed will of their people, can bring us back from the brink. In this sense, the fundamental lesson in climate change education must be the lesson of democracy. Thank you all so much for joining us, for joining our campaign. We look forward to being with you, mobilizing, marching, organizing, teaching, and learning with you as we move forward. Join us. See you next time.
The world needs climate change education now. As members of Education International, representing 32.5 million teachers and educators across the world, we call on all governments to make quality climate change education for all an immediate priority. Here's how. Every country must commit to making quality climate change education a reality for all students. Working together with education unions, student organizations, indigenous groups, and other stakeholders, governments must implement well-funded, inclusive climate education. We must make sure that every student is climate literate and equipped with the skills and knowledge to tackle climate change and build a more sustainable future. Quality climate change education is based on science and fosters critical thinking and civic engagement. It must motivate students and empower them to take action for climate justice in their communities and beyond. Teachers must be trained and supported. Governments must ensure that training and continuous professional development programs have the funding and resources they need. Educational infrastructure needs to be safe, climate resilient, and environmentally friendly. The fight against climate change must have an education base and a teacher's voice in every area of the world. Join us.